This is our period 4 review project, which encompasses everything from 1450 to 1750 of the Common Era. Here are the bookends for the start of this time period. European expansion and exploration is increasing drastically, especially at the start with the Portuguese. They are the ones who really got the ball rolling on that. The fall of Constantinople was the Ottoman Empire's first big rendezvous into world politics, and the Renaissance revolutionized the era, starting in Florence, Italy. Persia. In this time period, there were many political changes. The main political change was the exploration. Several countries, especially the Portuguese and the Spanish at the start, were funding exploration. These explorations led to colonies, and these colonies already had native peoples living in them, which led to several treaties being signed and put into place, such as the Treaty of Tordesillas, and a lot of these treaties were broken. And it led to politics in the New World, such as the Aztecs and the Incas, being destroyed due to them eventually being conquered by, in the case of the Aztec and the Incas, the Spanish.
Economy. Economy was changing very much due to the expansion of trade routes with the increasement of exploring. Along with exploring came the discovery of new items to sell. Some of these items included the finding of new crops, spices, and finding of more metals. With the increasing exploration, civilizations increased the amount spent on these exploration things, like boats, men, and supplies.
A lot of things changed religion-wise in period 4. The first thing was art. Art became more religious, the prime example of which being Michelangelo's painting of the Sistine Chapel. The Protestant Reformation also happened in this time period. The Protestant Reformation happened October 31st in 1517, and it was done by Martin Luther, who nailed his 95 Theses to the doors of a church. The Catholic Church also started to become even more corrupt in this time period. The Catholic Church is led by the Pope, and the Pope started to have heavy influence over the people and the government through corruption.
Society. Society was changing a lot during this time because people were wanting to see the world a lot more than usual. Due to the shift in what was being traded and what was being used to trade, mainly farmers who farmed old world foods would now have trouble selling them due to the introduction of new world foods. There was still a division between men and women. The men would go explore and discover new worlds, while the women would stay home and tend to the house and tend to the kids, while the men were out exploring and having fun.
Now onto the I in Persia, which is ideas and intellect. During this time period, many new ideas and technologies were created. For example, the compass, astrolabe, cartography, and the carabao were all created. Most of these inventions aided in exploration and colonization, which helped Europeans expand. Another great invention was the printing press, which allowed ideas to spread quickly through books. An example of this being used was the Protestant Reformation in Europe. And most of these ideas were created during the Renaissance, which was an increase in intellectual and artistic activities. And this helped bring about many of these new inventions. Now into art and architecture. Now into art and architecture. During this time period, art and architecture was used to legitimize the power of the rulers. And this led to Now into art and architecture. So during this time period, art and architecture was used to legitimize the power of the ruler by showing off their wealth and power. So in the bottom left here is an example of this, which is the Palace of Versailles, created by King Louis. And in the bottom right is the Taj Mahal, created in India. So these palaces were able to created partly because of the large amounts of wealth these rulers gathered from the new trade and wealth of this time period. Also, many of the arts was able to be funded because of this large increase of wealth. And Shakespeare was one of these artists that was able to be funded. He was able to create some of the greatest works of all time.
Here are the bookends for the end of this time period. The scientific revolution has been going on all throughout this time period, but it really started to pick up towards the end, and it's where science really came to be what we know it as today. The founding of America happened early on in period 5, but the seeds were planted in period 4. The French and Indian War began right after this time period ended, after tensions building between the French and the British. And it was a war between the French and the Native Americans versus the British.
CCOT. The major changes that occurred during this was to do with land exploration. These changes were things like finding of new lands, such as America, which would lead to massive change in what was trading. More American goods would now be traded to discover them, things like potatoes and horses. Global context was seen basically everywhere, except Canada, that is. This was due to everyone looking for some land. One thing that was continued in this time period was the fact that people were still looking to expand land due to their religion. They were wanting to help their God have a bigger grasp on all the lands.
Now for a comparison of Portugal and the Mughal dynasty. Portugal was a maritime empire that was based on trade, and the Mughal dynasty was a centralized kingdom in northern India. Portugal was the first kingdom to really start exploring for new trade routes out of Europe, and as a result they became involved in the many spice trade routes from Europe. The Mughal dynasty just started to get involved in this global trade. Portugal was strictly Roman Catholic. The Mughal dynasty had Islamic rulers with Hindu subjects. This sometimes caused religious conflicts in the kingdom. In society of Portugal, merchants became powerful from the wealth they gained from trading, and indigenous peoples on these lands were exploited for profit. While in the Mughal dynasty, Indian, Islamic, and Persian cultures blended together, and in Portugal, new inventions like the caravel were used to help them explore and find new trade routes. In the Mughal dynasty, paper was introduced and allowed for more painting and writing. In Portugal, large palaces and monuments were created to legitimize the power of the ruler, while in Mughal, the Persian and Indian influences helped create great structures like the Taj Mahal.
Here's our timeline for this period, starting in 1450 and ending in 1750. It gets pretty tight at the start and the middle, but then kind of slows down at the end. 1453 sees the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Empire. 1492, Columbus sails to the Americas for the first time. He kind of hops around the Caribbean for a few years. In 1494, the Treaty of Tordesillas is signed. 1508 sees the Sistine Chapel being painted by Michelangelo. And in 1517, the Protestant Reformation is started when Martin Luther nails the 95 Theses to the door of a church in Germany. This would later spark the religion wars. Jumping to 1652, the Dutch set up shop in the Cape of Good Hope. In 1652, again, the establishment of absolutism happens, started by King Louis XIV. And the last thing on our timeline, 1654, starts the reign of Kangxi.